we're staying local, if you will, by having Paul Ortiz join us. Paul Ortiz, of course, is at the University of Florida in the Department of History since 2008, almost 15 years, a decade and a half. Has been the director of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, doing the heavy lifting of documenting not just the experiences of Black and brown and marginalized people in the state of Florida, but doing tremendous work in documenting the civil rights movement in Mississippi. I must say, as well as the author of two tremendous books. His first one, Emancipation, and for much of the time that we've been together, 12, 14, 16 hours, Emancipation Betrayed lays bare the struggle around the vote among and led by African Americans at the late 19th century, early 20th century. It is just a phenomenal read. It is about Florida, and it completely obliterates this myth of sort of Florida exceptionalism, but also here not engaged in political activism, not participating in the political process. So it is amazing history, and of course he followed that up with an African American and Latinx history. This is a wonderful history that interweaves the stories of African American and Latinx people. It's a book that has absolutely driven Ron DeSantis insane, right? And which is in the best possible way. And let me also add, before I turn it over to Paul Ortiz, that Paul Ortiz and I were in graduate school together at Duke University. There was something in the water in North Carolina at Duke University, and Paul did wonderful work, has a tremendous outside shot. We play many a day in card gym, but even better than his hook shot and his jump shot is his scholarship. So Paul Ortiz, thank you so much for joining us. The platform is yours.
All right, well, thank you so much, Professor Hassan Jeffrey. He's a dear friend, and it's so great to see you again, brother. And I'm just so thrilled to be here and honored and humbled. And I was able to catch your questions in the wonderful previous session. We've been putting the word out here. I say down in Florida. Of course, many of you are here with us physically in Florida, but we have been putting out the word in my union, the United Faculty of Florida, about this incredible event, and encouraging our members and families and supporters and the media to attend, because what you're doing now is you're doing the important solidarity, history, educational work, and all those things really come together. I'm going to talk today probably less as a scholar and really put my union president's cap on. Until just last week, I was president of the United Faculty of Florida, University of Florida chapter. I'm now an officer in the union. Some of you have followed our struggles throughout the last several years, both against the state of Florida and its efforts to shut down academic intellectual freedom and to stop the kinds of teaching and education that you have been promoting on this amazing 24-hour teach-in. And at the outset, I want us to kind of take a step back and think about this for a moment. I know we're all aware of this, but because we're so passionate and we have so much momentum, I want to kind of get us to pause right now to think about, one basic fact. The incredible presentation that you just heard the last 30 minutes talking about issues of gentrification, redlining, anti-Black pogroms, settler colonialism, all of these amazing, important topics which are central to understanding why we are where we are now as a nation. Many of the things we're talking about today, K through 12 teachers cannot talk about in their classrooms, period. I want to also take a step back, and again, I know many of you know this, but I won't take anyone's knowledge for granted, that critical race theory is banned in Florida, K through 12. That is, you're not allowed to talk about this as a K through 12 teacher. The amazing 1619 history curriculum, which I work with on a regular basis with students, high school students, college students up north, outside of Florida. The 1619 history curriculum is banned in Florida. And on the higher education level, which is what I want to talk about primarily today, Governor Ron DeSantis and his acolytes in the Florida Senate, and especially those 40 billionaires who are supporting Ron DeSantis, most of them outside of Florida, are trying to make critical race theory illegal in higher education. They're trying to make gender studies illegal. And many of you followed with horror and concern, I'm certain, about a month ago, the state of Florida, Ron DeSantis' allies in the legislature introduced a bill, House Bill 999. And at the forefront of that bill, the bill would have absolutely banned gender studies in higher education in the state of Florida. It would have banned most of the conversations that we're having today, frankly, in this 24-hour teach-in. And through a lot of lobbying, phone calls, thousands of phone calls, hundreds of hours of testimony, our union was able to beat that back to a certain extent. That is, we were able to keep gender studies from being destroyed. We were able to take out some of the most devastating language in that bill, but still, as many of you know, that bill did pass in another iteration. And what's at stake now, friends, is a lot of well, basically what's at stake is our education, is our ability to teach history, is the ability of a lot of staff people to have jobs. I'm going to talk a little bit about collective bargaining in higher education and why the faculty at every university in the state of Florida are unionized now. But at the same time, I want to acknowledge the fact that most of the staff in the state of Florida are not unionized. That is, they don't have collective bargaining contracts. And so when Governor DeSantis signed this bill destroying diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, what kind of impact does it have on us in higher education? You know, look, I'm a senior professor, a full professor of history. I am protected by a collective bargaining union contract. But again, most of our staff, think of an office manager, think of a younger student affairs staff person, think of someone who works in veterans and multicultural affairs. Those are the folks who are affected most immediately and in a very devastating way by that anti-DEI bill. I'm a first generation college student, and for me, it was the DEI staff when I graduated from college who made it possible, by the way, for me to graduate from college in 1990. And as a military veteran, I spent a lot of time in the Veterans Affairs offices, a lot of time in multicultural and diversity offices back in the day. They didn't call it DEI back in the day, but I spent a lot of time working with staff who helped me as a first generation college student negotiate the confusing aspects of middle class college life. And growing up in the working class in a shipyard town, when I started college after 4 years in the military, special forces in Central America, I had no idea what on earth I was doing. But it was that multicultural and diversity affairs staff who made it possible for me to thrive and succeed and to join Hassan Jeffries at Duke University as a first generation history PhD candidate. Those are the types of staff who are under siege right now in the state of Florida, thanks to this anti-DEI bill. And my union, the United Faculty of Florida, we're going to do everything we can to protect those jobs as best as we can. We organized first in 1968. And the story I want to tell you today about our union, I'm trying to really counter, Professor Jeffries, that narrative of helplessness that is so often woven about those of us, the 22 million or so of us who live in Florida. That is, when I talk to reporters from the New York Times or the Washington Post, or I'm on panels up north in Yale or wherever, they'll often say, "Oh my gosh, it's so awful. How can you stand living in Florida? What a terrible thing to have to be under the rule of Ron DeSantis." And my response is, well, no, actually, it's an incredible intellectual activist experience. Look, I'm a movement historian. My mentors are people like Gwendolyn Zohar Simmons, a veteran of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, who recently retired from the University of Florida. Just an amazing SNCC freedom fighter that Hassan knows very well. My mentors in the farm worker movement were people like Dolores Huerta, Cesar Chavez. I worked directly with Dolores Huerta as a younger labor organizer with the United Farm Workers. So for me, I'm not one to shy away from a struggle. And the important thing that's happening in Florida right now, which is a positive aspect, is that it has been clarified for us 100% that if we want to offer the type of history and learning and community that this teach-in is promoting right now, this 24-hour teach-in, we're going to have to fight for it. If we want to continue trying to understand how the U.S. became a racist, imperialist, settler colonial nation, and how we can solve those problems and fight racism and fight oppression in all forms, we're going to have to fight for it. Because the state of Florida has made it clear that it wants to eliminate our ability to analyze and to understand the roots of oppression and the possibility of renewal and social movement building. Hassan and I had the tremendous privilege of studying under people like Professor Charles Payne, who wrote the wonderful I've Got the Light of Freedom. Many of the key concepts, and by the way, if you haven't read I've Got the Light of Freedom by Charles Payne, who is now a professor at Rutgers University, which just had an incredibly successful strike that my union supported. If you haven't had the great privilege of reading Charles Payne's I've Got the Light of Freedom, please do. After all these years, it's still a remarkable work. But Charles Payne's work, again, it's about oppression, it's about organizing, it's about resistance, it's about racism, it's about anti-racism. And again, many of these things, friends, the state of Florida are trying to ban. And many of you saw Governor DeSantis's horrific press conference early this week. Now, the one thing I have to give Governor DeSantis credit for is he's clear, he speaks plainly. He's not afraid to show us that he's a bigot. As a historian, I appreciate that, because when I look back and I go through archival records in the 19th and 18th centuries, people who were white supremacists back in the day were very clear. They're very blunt. They're very open. Thanks to the civil rights movement in the mid 20th century, a lot of the old white supremacists had to kind of attenuate or mediate their language. Well, Governor DeSantis and Donald Trump are throwbacks. They're very clear. They're not dog whistle racists. They're not dog whistle sexists. They're open about it. So Governor DeSantis said in his press conference announcing this latest legislation that if you want to study about oppression, if you want to study gender and those other things, you need to leave Florida and go to UC Berkeley. That's what he said. I'm just quoting the man's words. In other words, people like me, he's saying, Ortiz, get out. We don't want people like you. But I'm not going anywhere. And the reason I'm not going anywhere is because I have a union, the United Faculty of Florida. We organized in the 1960s because of the civil rights movement, because the civil rights movement gave us some passion and some hope that decade after decade of being fired and punished and disciplined for doing basic things. And this is what was happening at the University of Florida in the 60s. We had faculty who were being disciplined and denied tenure because they moderately supported the civil rights movement in Florida. We had a faculty member here, Marshall Jones. This is a famous case. You can Google it. He accompanied a group of students to St. Augustine, Florida, to be with Dr. King to bear witness during the St. Augustine phase of the movement. And when those students and faculty returned, they were all punished. And when Marshall went up for tenure, he was denied tenure, not because of his academic record, because he had a sterling academic record, but because of his civil rights activism. We had faculty here who were fired because students accused them of being either gay or lesbian in the 50s and 1960s. We had faculty fired here at the University of Florida because they criticized Robert E. Lee or Southern secession. And this happened decade after decade, generation after generation. In 1968, we said, basta ya, we had enough of it. And so we organized a union. It took many years. It took a decade for us to get our first collective bargaining contract. But our early founders give you, if I just describe one of them, it'll give you a sense of why we're a fighting union now and why we've been able to hold Governor DeSantis in check to a certain extent. One of the things we've been able to do, we've been able to apply pressure and create the intellectual energy to get a federal court injunction against the Stop Woke Act. A lot of people have forgotten about that. That federal injunction, by the way, is still in force. It forbids the state of Florida from imposing the Stop Woke Act, Governor DeSantis's favorite act. It's in stasis right now. We've been able to check it. But the reason that our union is so strong in these intellectual and academic freedoms, and the reason we use our grievance procedure to defend critical race theory, and we had a successful grievance a couple of years ago. Some of you followed it probably in the Chronicle of Higher Education. Some of our colleagues in the College of Education at UF were employing concepts germane to critical race theory in their work on race and inequality in urban school districts in the United States. And they were being told by the higher ups, oh, you know, Governor DeSantis is not going to like this. You know, you're talking about race and inequality. Well, we filed a grievance and we got national coverage about that. And those of you that followed baseball, it was kind of like a brushback pitch. We weren't trying to make the university look bad, but we were saying these younger scholars are studying race and inequality using the highest standards of academic rigor. They're not yelling fire in a crowded theater. They're not making stuff up. They're using research. They're using survey tools. They're using sophisticated analytical models. So leave them be. We know you may not like the race and inequality discourse, but it's there. If you study urban school districts in the United States of America, by God, it is definitely there. And so we won that struggle. But that's how we defend history, critical race theory, the ability to study oppression, and the ability to study and understand and better learn social movement building. We have developed our unions down here, our higher ed unions, to defend those concepts that many of us, including myself, Hassan, when I matriculated to UC Santa Cruz, and I taught at UC Santa Cruz for 7 years, and I thought I was in heaven. The first two dissertation committees I was on were chaired by none other than Angela Davis. And I got to know Angela and Bettina Aftiker, David Anthony, and Pedro Castillo, Larry Trujillo, Pat Savella, an amazing crew of senior scholars at Santa Cruz. And then, as Hassan mentioned, I moved to Florida in 2008, a completely different story. The people here just as smart, the students here brilliant, the staff and our university is incredible, but the ruling class here a little tougher, a little more in your face. So let me go back to when our union first started. One of our early presidents, and this will tell you a lot about like why we're a fighting union now. One of our early presidents, Hernan Vera. Those of you who study comparative race and inequality will know of Hernan Vera's incredible work, a 30-year career in higher education. But when he was in graduate school, in his native Chile, underwent a horrific coup. Augusto Pinochet came into power. And Hernan Vera's family had to flee from Chile literally to save their lives. And he became a professor here at the University of Florida in the early 70s, had a lot of struggles over tenure, but became a president of our union. And he was one of many early founding members of my union who either fled or survived dictatorships in different parts of the world, or also had been sons or daughters of Holocaust victims during World War II. And when they created our first collective bargaining contract, they made academic freedom the centerpiece of that contract. And so we have an article, it's Article 10 of our collective bargaining agreement, that says that as long as we're pursuing our scholarship and our disciplines in our disciplinary approved ways and methods, that the university can't mess with us. It's as simple as that. And furthermore, Article 10 requires the University of Florida to proactively defend academic freedom because, as the article states, both parties, and this is the faculty or the workers, that's us, and the university understand that academic freedom in this society is frequently in jeopardy. That's essentially what the article says. And so we've used Article 10 to defend colleagues in so many different ways. Let me give you one example. So after House Bill 999 was first introduced, there was panic throughout the state of Florida in higher ed. And there were rumors spread by some, I'll say, well-meaning members of our administration who said, look, gender studies is finished. We need to figure out how to get our gender studies faculty and get them into other departments and other schools. This is happening all across the state. It took one phone call. We called the administration of the University of Florida and we said, look, you can't shut down gender studies because Governor DeSantis doesn't like gender studies. And believe me, Governor DeSantis has made it clear he hates gender studies. When he was speaking before an affluent audience, I think in Southern California a couple of months ago, he said, why should truck drivers have to pay for gender studies? It kind of gives you an insight into his personality. But what the union said to our administration is, you can't abolish an academic department because the governor doesn't like it. This is not a tyranny yet. This is not a dictatorship yet, because we have a collective bargaining agreement. And what the collective bargaining agreement says is that you cannot do any major change in the terms and conditions of our academic employment without consulting the union. And don't you think that closing an entire department would be a major change in our terms and conditions of employment? And the administration instantly agreed with us. And I can't speak for our administrations here at UF or other universities in Florida, but I think our administrators actually like our unions now because we're the ones that are standing solid in support of intellectual freedom. We're the ones standing solid in support of Black studies. When the Dream Defenders called for a statewide walkout in support of African American studies in the state after Governor DeSantis banned the advanced placement African American studies curriculum, my union endorsed that call for a statewide walkout within minutes. We co-sponsored a 3-hour Black studies teach-in. Professor Jeffries, was just like being the 60s again. Just like when we teach in our classes about how ethnic studies, Black studies, Asian American studies, third world studies was started because of student walkouts and student passion and student energy. We had 150 plus students in this Black studies teach-in for 3 straight hours. It was like walking back into the Chicano blowouts of 1968. Just incredible.
Dr. Ortiz, I'm David Domke. I'm a professor here with Common Power, and I'm thoroughly interested in what you're talking about. I had the privilege to be on the faculty at the University of Washington for a couple decades. So whenever anybody starts talking about organizing and the ways that change occurs or is confronted at a university setting, I'm all ears. All right. So I wanted to ask you a couple questions. First, can I just get clear, when you're talking about the union here, we're talking about faculty, a faculty union, or are you talking about faculty and staff?
Yeah. So we're the United Faculty of Florida, UF chapter. We're part of a statewide higher ed union that exists on all of our university campuses and most of our college campuses. Now, some of the staff are unionized. Actually, the staff on our campus right now are in the middle of a big union organizing drive. Our graduate students are organized in an organization called the Graduate Assistants United, which is also affiliated with our union.
Okay, so on the faculty side of this, is it all public universities faculty are part of a union in the state?
That's correct. Now, we're a right to work state, which means that you don't have to be a member of the union to be covered under the collective bargaining contract. But all the public universities, the 12 public universities in Florida, all of them have faculty union chapters. That's correct.
Okay. That's remarkable because there is no faculty union at the University of Washington, and the notion of there being a statewide union just is beyond anything I could have imagined. And it has the faculty have paid a price over and over and over again on compensation, on benefits during the pandemic. It was very difficult. I love your shirt and how important the union undoubtedly was during the pandemic battles. So a follow-up question. So when you say that you endorsed a walkout and within 3 hours over, I think you said the Black Studies curriculum. How many, maybe you said this earlier, but how many people are we talking about across these 12 universities are in the unions?
Well, we represent 25,000 faculty in the bargaining unit. Our membership right now across the state is about a little less than half of that in terms of people who are members of the union. So we're organizing right now, though. In terms of the walkout, it's hard to know how many students participated in that walkout. Thousands. I know here at just my campus, University of Florida, hundreds of students participated in that walkout. Yeah.
And so how do you see how do you see an Armageddon kind of coming here where the strength of these unions, the strength of the union presence there across these 12 campuses, and the strength of what Governor DeSantis and Republican leadership are doing, because they're clearly not backing down, they're elevating, and you guys have a certain strength to begin with, and then you further kind of invest in each other because you're together in solidarity in this. I know that you've talked about you got an injunction against the Stop Woke Act, or the Don't Say Gay bill. I can't remember. It's tough for me to keep track of these different ones. But you had that. Do you see an endpoint to this in any kind of like dramatic fashion, or do you just see it as a kind of day by day exercise in resistance and struggle?
Well, it's an excellent question, and probably the latter. The latest legislation that DeSantis promoted and was passed by the supermajority GOP legislature was an attempt to decertify our unions. And last week, we filed a federal lawsuit, which is being looked at right now in the federal court of Northern Florida against this illegal, unconstitutional bill. Some people have said, well, if the bill passes, the unions will be broken, but we're not going to let that happen. We're going to outlast Governor DeSantis. And, now I'll put my historian's cap on and say that
sure,
for good or bad, people forget who the governor of Florida is 10, 15, 20 years after their tenure finishes. But the United Faculty are going to be of Florida are going to be here longer, much, much longer. Let me rephrase that. We're going to be here long after people forget the name of Ron DeSantis, frankly. And the reason is that we have such incredible community support. It gets back to, again, that last wonderful session in terms of community organizing. So our union sees labor unionism and when we talk even about academic freedom, it's not just about the faculty. It's not just about instructors. It's about our students' right to major in any major they want to major in. It doesn't matter if it's engineering, women's studies, Black studies, whatever. We also step up for the community whenever we can, and we support affordable housing. We have put our voices in support of higher wages for workers outside of Florida. And so that's our strength. It's in the community.
I get to ask you one more question, and then we're gonna move to our next session. But you said that you're intentional about countering a despair narrative, a despair understanding. And I'm wondering how, what's for those of us who are not living in Florida, but are there with you in solidarity, what's a thing that we could do to help you in that endeavor?
Organize where you're at, because if it hasn't come to where you are now, all of the challenges that we're learning about in these 24 hours, it will be there, it will be coming. And so the best thing that you can do where you're at is to get organized, get ready to support each other, to get ready to fight gentrification, racial inequality, labor oppression. Get organized. You know, we love to hear from folks outside of the state of Florida. United Faculty of Florida UF, it's easy to get in contact with us. We love those gestures of solidarity, but we want to help you too. So call on us to help you. Again, we're not helpless down here. We're holding the line for Ron DeSantis, but it's because of events like this that allow us to have platforms to get together to kind of plan and strategize our next steps to build a truly democratic society. That's the goal.
Thank you so much for your work. And this is in your presentation and this Q&A, I can feel the strength, and we're honored to spend this time with you all and to be inspired by you. I feel very much like Dr. King's words, the words that he delivered when he went to Nashville in 1961. And he said, I didn't come to bring inspiration. I came to receive inspiration. And that's the way we're feeling about all the folks who are doing the work in Florida. We're getting really inspired by you all. Thank you.